So we recognize that you have some more amount of experience in debating at this point, and you will also at some point be judging debates in your practice rounds or for younger debaters. Judging is also quite a really healthy way to get better debating, because if you're seeing debates from the perspective of a judge, you start realizing what judges are looking for, you start realizing what gaps can be plugged. I'm tempted to lock the door after this. Alright, so it is something we recommend you do as well to get better. Okay, so we also recognize that BP is a complicated format and you are ranking 4 teams, and that can be quite challenging. So what we've done is we've assembled ourselves here. We all have judged quite a few debates, and we are happy to answer judging related questions you have and offer more tips and suggestions on judging BP debates after. So does anyone wanna, start?
Break the ice.
Yeah. What have you always wondered about in terms of BP judging? What have you struggled with?
What if this stream of judges who don't care about closing oppositions, closing out? Speakers, yes, speakers.
Okay, what is this about?
Just answer all of them.
No, let's answer.
Okay, so my take on this would be judges are often, so if you think about it, the amount of comparisons you have to make when you're comparing 4 different teams is essentially, I'm not good at math, but it's at least 6 different comparisons that need to be made if you want to close the entire thing. You have 15 minutes for deliberation in the average tournament, at which point people come, start nagging you, you have runners, you have the tap game, and in that time you have to do all the comparisons, let your wings speak, and do speaks as well. That is actually impossible. If you really try to do all these things, it is impossible in effect to do. So judges invent shortcuts. Some of these shortcuts are good ones, like people who are very experienced will often have an intuitive grasp of why certain arguments matter less than others, and they make these automatic prioritizations in their head while the debate is already going on. However, less experienced judges will tend to do things like tend to look for the simplest solution they can to complex problems. So, for example, it is almost never the case that there is no extension. Like saying there was no extension, this happens, but it's very, very rare that no new thing has been said. The much more likely scenario is something new has been said. It's not clear how new that thing is. It's not clear whether that thing is actually a major contribution, and you don't really have the patience to start going word for word and comparing these 2 things. So what judges will often do is say, in the best case, it will be something like, look, the main logic was actually in opening already, so it's not much of an extension. In the worst case, it will be, the headline was already in opening, therefore it's not an extension in closing. So as a judge, my tip would be to not do this and actually try and look at it. As a speaker, what I would suggest doing is being very explicit what it is that you're extending and what the unique value that your extension brings is. Make that job easier for judges, and you will see them making that sort of mistake significantly less.
My take on your question is, one, I agree with you. We come from the same circuit and face the same problem. Secondly, I think there are a number of ways in which we can try to reduce this. For example, current tabbing applications such as Tabby allow you to submit feedback for judges after rounds. This is something that CA teams very widely look to do, and we do look through that feedback. So, contrary to popular opinion, which is like, people just break judges, they're like, no, we do look through that feedback. And then when you wait for rounds, you most often wait for rounds because judges are looking through feedback and because we're doing allocation. So, of course, one of the ways to combat this is to submit as much feedback as you can, because that gives us information about who should not be judging which rounds. The second thing is, when talking about ESL, EFL bias, I mean, yeah, it's a huge problem. One of the ways in which we can deal with this, I don't know, as core comms or as CA teams, for example, is there were numerous briefings that I've been to where when you're delivering a judge's briefing, you just say, remember guys, the fact that someone doesn't have a cute accent doesn't mean that they're a bad speaker and doesn't mean their argument is bad. And it works in a similar way as to what Lucia and I were talking about half an hour ago, when you as a speaker notify the judges of the fact that you're ESL, but that doesn't mean your argument is worse. I think ORCOM's and CA teams should make sure in their judges' briefings to remind people very subtly that the fact that somebody is not speaking English as a native language does not mean we should discard arguments. Because nobody does this on purpose, the subconscious bias. I think that what we can do as CA teams, for example, is just try to bring it up to a conscious level and say, don't do this, and warn people of this during briefings. I think that would probably be my take on this.
So my take is obviously, I agree with everything that's been said. I think in debates, sometimes when there's disagreement about which team gave more valuable material, it might just be helpful if you're a panelist in that room to just ask for an audit of what's been said. So when you're assessing an extension, it might first be useful to say, what is the extension as we understand it? So we're just on the level of like making sure we understood what was said in a summarizing kind of way. And then afterwards to go, all right, do we think this is actually important or more important than the previous material? So that might be one way to do it. So if you're in a panel and you think that a speaker is being discounted, that they actually said a lot of stuff in opening and their closing team just said it in sexier ways, or like maybe a closing team wasn't as fluent but their extension is actually quite valuable, so you can suggest this. You can go, what did we get from each one? Let's just be a bit more thorough about this.
And also as a panelist, don't be afraid to do that.
Yeah.
Very often happens that panelists have a more correct call than chairs, but they're afraid to roll the chair because they think that the chair won't break them or that the chair is going to give them horrible feedback. Very few people are such horrible people that are going to give you horrible feedback and that you're not going to be broken because you disagree with them. That doesn't happen really often. If you can explain why you're rolling the chair, you're still going to get good feedback. If a chair gives you bad feedback, we still request reasoning for bad feedback. This means that if you want to roll the chair and if you can explain your call, you're still probably going to get good feedback, and if not, there are correcting mechanisms for like dropping this out and not taking it into consideration when we're breaking you as a judge. So don't cut teams short because you're afraid this is going to hurt your chance of breaking as a judge.
I think importantly, adding on to also what Sharms was mentioning, I think that the best thing that you can do if you're trying to prevent a team from taking a position that they shouldn't be taking in the debate is have just like two things that I think that they said, bam, bam, and then the chair is forced to discuss that. I think that like bringing those concrete reasons and concrete things that you think OG, like CG or CO has brought to the table is a lot better than just having like a vague feeling that they said something important. Bringing those concrete things into discussion means that the chair and the other panelists have to respond to those and have to address them, rather than being like, I don't know, I felt that the argument was compelling. Specifically be like, I found this part of the argument compelling. Here's why I think this is more important than the nonsense that OG was talking about. This is completely new, we need to address this. So being very specific in the parts of the argument that were new and that were important means that other judges in the panel have to acknowledge that, respond to that, and also it means that, as I said, you get better feedback.
Yeah. No, I said be willing to make specific references in your notes and go in the last part of the second speech this was actually said, right? Sorry.
I think that's also general advice for your delivery of feedback.
Yeah.
What I find useful is, after I reach my call, I like to write down the reason for my call in bullet points, similar as I would to writing a debate speech or a case. Because although I know why I'm judging the debate the way I am, and I'm drawing my reasons for my notes, but when you have to explain it to someone verbally, it's hard to draw it from your notes because they're all scattered around, different things are important, some things are crossed out, some things are in red, some things are in green. Rather, when you know what the call is, and when you decide on the call, write down the reasoning in one comprehensive structure, as if you would a debate case. I often break it down into brackets. So, OG versus OO, I underline this, these are the points of reasoning why I decide. It's far easier for you to deliver like the call to the chair, who is then going to think you're more persuasive and is going to have an easier time understanding your call. And it's easier to give debaters good feedback, which is good because it's a nice thing to do and people learn and it's all warm and fuzzy, but it also helps you get good feedback in terms of like breaking as a judge if that's something that you're looking for at a specific turn.
So with that in mind, I think that tracking things that are happening in debates is, and also sort of how to best take notes in regards to having a good discussion is something that I found quite challenging when I first started judging. So does anyone have any questions that relate to like how we take notes or how to track things or anything like anything like that. No? How do you guys, yeah?
How do you take notes?
It was not necessarily that leading, but okay, no, but I do think that this is quite useful, right? Because I think that one of the main problems that I have one of the main things that I see with people that I'm judging with is that oftentimes they're like, I think this is my goal, and I'm like, okay, can you like explain why opening op beats opening government? And they're like, they have to like struggle through a lot of their notes, then they have to like spend a long time looking for the reasons, and that wastes a lot of time. And as chairs don't usually want to discount what you say, but if you're taking 3 minutes to come up with reasons why OO beats OG, that's like so much time of 15 minutes of adjudication, and sometimes they just have to move on.
Yeah.
So I think that having good notes and being quickly able to come up with the reasons is useful. And I think that the best way to immediately be able to, as we discussed earlier, be like, here's 2 things that I think CEO has said, here's why I think they're important. The best way to be able to ensure that you have that is having good notes. So I think that everyone probably has very different styles. So I'm just going to talk about what I do, and if you find that useful, then that's fine, but there's obviously many different ways. So what I like to do is I like to first keep track of what I think is beating which during the debate. As Ayal said, there's basically 6 different things that you have to decide when judging. But if you take them individually, it's relatively easy. After top half, after OG and RO have both spoken, I like to be just like, who do I think is winning here? And then I take a note of that. Like, I think OO is beating OG. Then after the closing halves are over, I like to go like, do I think that this is enough to beat their openings? Yes or no? So then you already have like the top half and then these 2 decided. And then I just compare sort of like, do I think that CG or CO is better? And then I make a note of that. And then lastly, it's just like the diagonals, right? But I think that breaking it down into pieces and also doing it as the debate progresses is quite good. So after top half, you already have one thing, right? At least in the discussion, you can be like, I think that OO beats OG. And equally, you can be like, and also I think that CG is better than CO. So you already have at least 2 of the things that you need to decide. So I think that keeping track of it during debates is useful.
So I would indeed agree with this. So some people have that impression that judging means you're just passively listening and taking notes, but actually not. You're already engaging with the debate and making these comparisons as the debate is happening. And in your notes, in my case, what I do is OG makes an argument, or first speaker OG makes an argument, it's responded to in opposition. Like, I find a way to just note that or highlight that or encircle it or just go rebuttal answer. Now the difficulty here is teams, ideally you want them to flag all of the material that's responsive, right? Like you want them to say, this is what they said and look at me now directly responding to it, but they don't. And so you need to be able to recognize that as well. So you're listening, but it's a very active form of listening and you're engaging with the round. Of course you're not intervening, but you're like, so this material is actually responding to this material, and I'm just gonna make a note of that there. Or this one mitigates this argument, but doesn't beat it because it didn't respond to this most important part of the argument, no answer, question mark, question mark, question mark. Mm-hmm. So like these ways of reminding yourself of the comparisons in your notes.
So the way, basically, most technically, which is what I'm going to talk about, I will have usually 2 pages of paper. One, I will divide it just into 4, where each of these quarters will be a speech. Where what I try to do is just follow the logic of the speech as it goes. Like I will write down not every word, but like this leads to this, conclusion, things of that sort. And then I have, but if I just have that, I know I will not be able to use that during the discussion. That's too much material. So I also have another page where I just write argument. So there are 2 ways of doing this. One basic one and then a more advanced one. So the basic one is just OG. Here are, I'm doing this from right to left because I'm used to Hebrew, but OG. Here are an argument. Here's the bottom line, the argument that OG has made. And I write to myself, if this is an argument that's actually been proven, I will note that. If it's an argument that has a very weak proof, I might put a little note to myself. I will leave like maybe 2 lines between them where I can insert rebuttal. Like, so here's what OO replied to this, here's what CO replied to this. And then what I have there on this page, just basically in a very, very short format, everything the teams have said throughout this debate. Ideally, I would want to also have this differentiated into clashes. So not just what teams have said, but this is a clash, this is what OG has said about this clash, this is what OO has said about this clash, this is what CG has said about this clash. So nowadays, usually at the end of PM, I can sort of deduce what the clashes are likely to be, and then I just add more clashes if they open up later on. If you're still taking your first steps as judges, I would just suggest starting out with OG, OO, CG, CO. If you can do it arranged by clashes at some point, it's very useful because you can track it even better.
I think that particularly when you're winning still, the thing that chairs usually ask for when they go like, can you explain to me what OG said and what they want OO, is like that sort of speediness of like, here are the 3 things that OG contributed, here's why they're more important than the 3 things that OO contributed. I do think that having that separate piece of paper is super useful. I also have that. I do like a little square.
Yep.
So I have like OG, OO, CG, CO, and then I just draw arrows.
Yep.
So I draw like. Also,
for me, the arrows are confusing.
Yeah,
I
so
like arrows.
I draw an arrow. So like, if I think that OG has beaten OO, I draw like an arrow going from OO to OG. So I know that like these guys, I'm edging towards these guys. But on the little square, I importantly have like these are the 3 arguments that I think OG gave. The really good thing about doing this, I think, is that it forces you, because it's like a smaller space in just one paper, it forces you to only add the things that are actually relevant in OG. Because as Sharm said, speakers are sometimes like, this is so important, and you're like, no, it really is not.
Yeah.
So you don't have to write that down. You can say immediately, you're like, the 3 meaningful contributions that I wrote down, because I thought they were important arguments, rather than a speaker ranting for 5 minutes about why they don't like X political party. The 3 things that I wrote down that they added are these. Here's why I think they're better than OOs.
What often helps me is writing debate commentary on my flowing papers.
Yes.
So I use a different color pencil, and when something happens, which I think is important for a debate, I wrote what happened. So, I don't know, for example, or if a member of government says something that I think is conceding a point to OO, I write concession in big red letters. So it's just notifying myself what happened at that specific point, because those are going to be the tipping points. The moment when someone concedes something, and then this means that the case is weaker. The moment when someone stabs someone, and then you disregard that part of the case. This is very important for you to judge relations between teams. And so if you use a technique that, for example, Lucia was talking about with the alternative paper, I think it becomes easier for you to translate the huge amount of matter from your original papers to the other paper if you have very clear notices on your papers as to what happened where. Then just go, okay, big red letters, no mechanism, big red letters, concession, big red letters, knife, this is probably important. I'm going to instruct these 3 things. I'm going to put them on the other paper. And then that speeds up like your writing, your deliberation, your education, your reasoning, and so on and so forth.
I'll just add one additional thing to take from this. If you are whip speakers, it's essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
Like that's all the things you do as judges are also a very good way to use to structure your notes and structure your speeches when you are when you're giving a whip speech. I said this in a workshop earlier today. One of the ways I like to think of a whip speaker is basically a biased adjudicator. Like you're sitting on the panel and you're trying to persuade, you really want this thing to go through, and you're explaining why that is the case. So it's very similar tactics.
Should we take another one? So you first?
Okay. So it's an interesting question. I think it's very important about a judge's expressions while the debate is happening. So there are different judges, and some do different expressions of face, some have a poker face, and it's kind of intimidating and scary, depends on the case.
Okay.
So what do you think, what should be the best?
So judges in general are instructed to have a poker face. So if they look serious, do not take that as a sign that they're disagreeing with you or that they're doubting your case. They are meant to not display any emotions, precisely so they don't indicate any bias or any disapproval, right? Now, if the joke is really funny, I think it is okay for a judge to laugh. Like, they are also human. And it is also like very demoralizing for a speaker who cracks a funny joke and you're just like, which I it has the opposite effect at this point of like being a bit hostile then, right? So I don't mind, like I would laugh at funny jokes, but in general I try to keep a very calm and poker face demeanor. If a speaker is visibly distressed or like very young and like a novice and terrified, I tend to look a bit more encouraging and not. But that doesn't mean I agree with the case. It's really more just, it's okay, like, this is a supportive room. But don't try to read too much into judges' expressions.
The one thing that I would add in situations where I find that judges sometimes not is like the debate is going horribly wrong. Just like no one is on clash, no one has made a relevant argument. And then one person stands up and starts to say something that seems like it is what the debate should be about, and the judge immediately is like, in that situation, it usually is like, yes, continue that line of argumentation, please, for the love of God. So I think that that's the other one in which judges will sometimes nod.
They shouldn't, but
They shouldn't, but
That's
yeah.
understandable.
Yeah, to like encourage the debate to continue around those lines. I think it was.
Yeah.
So there first, and then you after. Yeah.
So the thing I'm struggling with the most at the moment is not the process of like adjudicating people pre-fund, but what happens after the debate is done, and that's like deliberations. I started chairing like recently. I sometimes find myself like having problems actually like leaving the deliberation, especially when you have like 3 more panelists and they have 5 different calls on basically everything. How do you manage it in 15 minutes and in the same time like give room for people to actually speak and to actually say their opinion and to maybe be swayed by it and not be like constantly pressured by the time management and all the different people? Yeah.
So I think the dynamic is different if you're chair panel. So let's talk about when you're chair. What I usually do, and there might be different views here, is I do a straw poll first. So I'm like, all right, 2 minutes to go through our notes. Now, can people tell me their initial rankings? So then you look at their initial rankings, and on the basis of that, and your own thoughts on the debate, you can identify the easier conversations and the harder conversations. So if everyone had the same vote first, that's great. So a good place to start would be that, perhaps, and to say, can we just firm up our consensus on this and check ourselves? Why do you have them first? That's if there is some agreement. Or like if there's some agreement on the top 2, but people just have it reversed, and another bottom 3 and people just have it reversed, right? So, and like asking people, I guess, what they think are the closest calls and focusing on that is one way. The other way might be, like, assuming it's just like a clusterfuck of like epic proportions and just unthinkable chaos. One thing I usually do is I just do the more obvious direct comparisons. So let's start with OG versus OO. What do you think happened here? Because that is the easiest to compare, I think. And then get some consensus on that. Even if it's not absolute consensus, at a certain point, like perhaps like 6 or 7 minutes in, you have to go, all right, most of us seem to think, oh, it's ahead of OG, this has to be a provisional thing. We will revisit this, but we now need to look at other things as well. Comparing on sides is also quite useful. The diagonals I find to be the hardest to do. And some of the ways to do that would be to look at their points of information and ask people about that, and to also compare material that's implicitly responsive. So to go, I mean, obviously OG can respond to CO. I've noticed that for a lot of younger judges, there seems to be a tendency to like preference material that was said later in the debate because that's what sticks with them more. So to just remind people, can we go back through our notes? Sometimes you as a chair simply intervening by saying, so there was this argument that was actually made in the opening half that I think we might not be taking note of. Did you register this argument? And what do you make of it? So I think it's also about being able to identify if your panelists are understanding the arguments correctly. Like, where is the disagreement coming from? Is it coming from they all understand what was said and they disagree on how important it is? Or is someone actually misunderstanding what was said or not understanding what was said? And to intervene in that case and clarify and go, I think this actually was the conclusion of that argument, or this is why it was said. So identifying those things. And if you're still disagreeing after, actually I should turn over and ask other people what else they do, but yeah.
So I obviously agree with everything Sharmila said. I will add a few things on managing panels, specifically when you have your own call and the panel seems to go in very different directions from that, which is often problematic, especially in tournaments where you have a short amount of time. So first thing that I think is almost always useful, if both of you agree or if you disagree with calls, is I would usually not give my own call to my wings in the beginning, because two things will tend to happen from that. Either wings will adjust their call accordingly, even if they thought something else. So I can't really test them in the best way and see if assess their own judging abilities, which is sometimes important. But also, if there is a lot of disagreement, then wings can sometimes do the opposite and tend to think that my intervention is biased in a sense, because they know I am leaning towards a certain aim. So I will generally refrain from letting people know what my initial call is. What else is, like, there are two scenarios. There is a scenario where you as a chair are also unsure, and that happens. And then that is when this discussion becomes really, really useful. And you go to, as Sharmila said, you leave the most time for the hardest calls, the ones where you're honestly unsure, and you think, I need to hear a lot of things on this. But it's also very important to direct your panelists to the not just why do you think this team beats this team, but to much more specific questions. Do you think that that specifically this principled claim here responds to this practicality or this harm coming from OG? Things like that, because it makes the discussion much more structured, much more useful. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is where you are quite clear on a specific call, but you have disagreements within the panel on that. And I think here it's very useful to start out with hearing the opinion of someone who you think has the wrong call, and let them explain why they think this is the case, and then ask someone who you agree with their call, and then you can sort of step in and affirm that and add some reasons there, which I think is a better way of getting people on your side to see things from your perspective. Two additional things, and then I'll hand over. One is, I think, well, I agree with Sharmila that there is the question of the more complex and the easier calls. There is also the question of when there is a disagreement in the panel, there is also the question of what is the most important call or correction that needs to be made. Like, for example, round 1 of Euros in 2017, which was the first time I was chairing in Euros or Worlds or a big tournament like that, I have a debate where I see this as a clear top half, like very clear top half, with interesting nuances between both OG and OO, like I can see this flipping, I have a slight tendency, but I can see them flipping, and in the same way in bottom half. Like I think bottom half is clearly below top half, but I could see a call for CG, I could see a call for CO. 3 wings all have the room, all read the room as bottom half. And I go, this is the important thing. I don't care, and I actually spent maybe 13 minutes of this discussion bringing all my wings on board on this is actually top half, instead of making the discussions that I felt were actually necessary, just because I felt that it would be sometimes maybe sad or maybe problematic if a team did not get the position they most deserved on the second and first, but it would be atrocious if they got the third and fourth. And therefore, this is the one that's more important for me to have at this point. This is the discussion that's more important for me to have at this point.
In terms of methods, I'm quite similar to what Sharmila does. For me, it's generally a question of identifying which comparisons you want to talk about and identifying a logical flow in which you want to do them, so you can refer to earlier comparisons when making later comparisons. Because very often it's useful to use a third team as a metric for 2 other teams. Like, if we bring them into the discussion, relations of like OG and CG to OO can help determine OG versus CG as well. Another thing I like to do is just try to summarize what people have said. So after people give their opinions, okay, this is what we agree on, this is what we disagree on. Let's talk about disagreement. Okay, what we have concluded together is now this. The only thing we still disagree on is this. Like, just give short summaries of what people have said for everybody to hear. So it's very clear to follow the structure, and it's very clear what we have to talk about next. I think that's very important in terms of keeping all people on board, in the sense that very often in panels, people will not just disagree on calls, they will also disagree on what is the most important discussion to have. I think in this way, you can kind of set the agenda towards what you believe is the most important discussion. So if your question is panel management, I think that allows you to like incentivize panels to talk about the things you believe are most important at that specific point in time.
Yeah, I would emphasize that, well, Ayal is very nice. I call it good willing and bad willing. Usually there's one that is kind of right and there's one that is just wrong. So in that regard,
You're an optimist.
I think it usually happens. And I think that especially, and when I first started chairing, I think that what I found is that CAs would take that into account and be like, Lucia is not like a super experienced judge yet, so like we'll give her like one nice panelist. Or oftentimes you will even have, if you were also for people who will be like starting to get tested as chairs, you usually have like someone that the CA team trusts watching you. So you may not know who that person is, but they will sometimes put someone who they trust. And sometimes using that good wing as like a, you are the voice of reason, and then you're like, I actually agree with that. The one thing that I think also is very important is, I think it's very unhelpful when people disagree with you and you just like go like, oh, what CEO said. I think that the best thing to do to make someone change their minds or engage in a productive discussion is to specifically point out or respond to their criticism. To be like, oh, okay, you seem to be valuing this argument over this argument. So responding to that explicitly, what these guys have said about that is they did like a weighing in with, and here's what they said, whereas they said nothing, and I think that this is quite persuasive. What do you think? And usually that would be like, oh yeah, actually, like I hadn't heard that, or like I hadn't realized that they said that. That's fine. So I think that explicitly addressing their concerns is a useful way to get them to flip.
So I'm just going to quick thing, and then we'll move on. Sometimes there might be outstanding questions that can completely change a person's mind. So I can have someone in the panel who is like, I don't know if the material in opposition with speech was new material. And if we agree that it is new material, then they are suddenly a fourth instead of a first. So asking those types of questions, asking people, what I usually do is I'm like, is there anything, so it's similar to what Lucia said, is there anything that will persuade you? Or is there anything that you are not sure of that we should resolve first before you can be clear on the rankings? So the question of like whether it was new material in the whip speech comes up a lot. The other thing is, was that knifey or not? Did they actually knife their opening or not? Did we actually think this crucial bit of analysis come up? Did we think it came out in OO, or was it actually said enough to have the same conclusion? Is CEO just repeating? So those kinds of like really basic questions that can immediately change the way people place teams in the round might matter. And for the more complex ones, the whole, usually with someone I disagree with, I'm just like, what is going to persuade you? And I try to answer that, or I try to disagree that that should be what should persuade them, or you really just disagree in the end, right?
Yeah, it's connected to the previous topic about facial expression. Yeah, because I don't have problem with poker face, I don't have problem with when someone is smiling, but I really do have a big problem when someone is telling me in a way that what I'm saying is wrong. And it happened to me a lot, like 2 times maybe, and it really distracted me. But the point is that, can I ask the judge like not to do it? Is that like inappropriate to say so?
It's not, but you are taking a very big risk, right?
Yeah.
So
no, not during the debate. After the debate,
you can have a quick chat with them and go, I don't mean any offense, but I did find that when you like smirked at me, that I felt like quite thrown off. You could do that in a very mild and polite way. What I would say is just assume the best of people. So obviously if your judge is like obviously making faces and going, or like,
yeah, but I some people done.
They shouldn't. In which case, you should talk to the judge and you should talk to the equity officer of the tournament, and you should just go, the judge made all these faces that made me uncomfortable. Are you able to approach them on behalf of you? Right? Hang on, guys. But at the same time, so, and you should, but couple this with assuming the best of people. Like some people have resting bitch face. Like, I don't have a problem.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah. But if it's very overt, then yeah.
I'll just add quickly on that there are, I completely agree that it's very bad behavior for judges to do this, and I think that generally this is something you should definitely tell a judge that you felt was done bad, and if that judge doesn't respond to that, then definitely going to the equity team, to the CA team is a legitimate thing. I would say though, that there are, first of all, we often do misinterpret what those expressions mean. Like for example, there are chairs where they think that you could have made a much better analysis there, and they go like, because it annoys them that it was so close to being that one thing and it wasn't. I got that more than once. Or on the other hand, the judge smiling and nodding and going, I gotcha. Like, you got this wrong, you're actually on the flip side, things like that. So it's very hard to really calibrate ourselves according to the expressions we're getting from judges. I also had experience with excellent judges who would, for example, play with their phone while listening to a debate, which for me was super disrespectful, but for them was an ADD issue, that they actually concentrate better when they do this. So, as Sharmila said, assume the best, but do come talk to them if this is something you felt bad.
How do you decide for personal points for speakers?
Sorry, speaker points.
Oh, how do you say? So speaker points. So the first thing to note is that speaker points are obviously based on the ranking. So the team that took the fourth can want to take more team points than the team that took the first or the second or the third. So I think that settling on the ranking first is the most important thing. I think that after that, if the most important thing I would say is you need to familiarize yourself with the speaker score, with the speaker scale. I think it is quite difficult to be like, I think this was a 75, if you don't know what a 75 is supposed to be. So I think that everyone should sort of like take a look at the speaker score, or first and foremost. I do think that it's quite difficult to decide speaks. If you're like, is this an 85 or is this like a 75? Like when you just start. I think that in many cases the chairs will have a better idea, but it's not always true. So you can and you should point out to chairs when you think that something is too low. At some point when I was winging someone, they were like, oh, I think this was like a 79, and I was like, I think that's a bit like harsh. I thought this was a very good speech. I think maybe like a couple of points higher. And they were like, no, it's round one. They shouldn't get more than an 80. And I'm like, well, I mean,
No, what?
that doesn't make sense, right? You could give a fantastic speech, and it shouldn't matter if it's round one or round five. So I think that you should point out if you think that it's too high or too low. To at least hear an explanation for it. And I think that then that also allows you to give a better idea, to get a better idea of what speaks are like. Because I think I got the radius when I was like, oh, do you not think that it's an 80? And be like, no, not quite. I think that like the line of like, I think that this, as the scale says, had some gaps in analysis and was vulnerable to some very strong, to some responses from the other teams. And I thought, oh, okay. So I think that familiarizing yourself with the scale and asking questions to people who give speaks to be like, why is it like this? Why is it a bit higher? Is useful.
So, you know, there are different perspectives on this. So some people are like, don't think about the numbers at all. Have your ranking first, and then think of the numbers after. Some people do this, think it's fine. I kind of do both simultaneously. So I look at the speech, and at the end of the speech, I kind of have a rage for it. So after the Prime Minister's speech, I'm like, to me, this is kind of like a 77, 78, or 78, 79. But I don't like fully commit myself to that, because we're still gonna have a discussion, right? But it does help you to anchor you. Because like, even if all those arguments of the PM got rebutted later on, then maybe that person gets a higher mark, but that doesn't mean PM was bad. So it's just like a good like anchor. Usually, and I think this is probably because I'm an experienced judge, at this point, the speaks that I estimate, the range that I estimate corresponds with my rankings. So I have no problem. But when they don't, that might give you pause, and either you adjust the speaks or you rethink your ranking, I guess. But that might be another way to do it. We're gonna say that.
Also, as chairs, do not be afraid to reward people for a speech that you thought was good.
Yeah.
I think that many new chairs are afraid that they're gonna break the tab or they're gonna go too high. If you think that a speech was good, give that speech good speaks.
Yeah.
Don't mark it down just because you think that's the average of the tournament and you have to stick to that.
Yeah.
That's a very stupid idea. I mean, and of course, speaks are inherently subjective, and some people give higher speaks and some people give lower speaks. But if you personally feel and have reasons and can justify that his speech was an 83, don't give an 80 just because you believe other people will give this person an 80. Reward that speech.
Yeah.
And on that same note, spend time thinking about speaker points. Don't just gloss over them after you've gotten the ranking.
Yeah.
Not just they determine who breaks or who doesn't break, they also determine breaking order, which determines which rooms you're going to be in later. So it's also important, and it's important to people on a personal level. So, ending in the top 10 on a tab for the first time is a notable achievement. Being top speaker for the first time in your life is a notable achievement. People remember those things, and it matters in the same way in which a break matters. And in terms of like concrete advice, I would say, except for familiarizing yourself with the speaker scale, it always helps, and tournaments very often provide printed out speaker scales for you to carry. If you're unsure, you can always consult the speaker scale and try to like compare the categories of argumentation, of style, or whatever that are in the speaker scale with what a speech has said, and at least try to set it within a range, and then, well, decide within the range, but it can help you gouge the range.
Just on the technicality of that, and then we'll open tomorrow. Just on what Tim said now, I think this is a great way to use my wings as well. When I have the speaker scale before me, they don't. I just read out the description of the category I think it's in, and then tell them I could also read one above, one below, and just to get a sense of what they actually think, not the numbers, but the descriptions actually correlate to. And that can be sometimes very useful. Other thing I'll say is just like, I think usually it helps in the discussion to just go from who do we think is the best speaker in the room, what do we think their speaks are, and then you need the description less, because you just go, well, this speech clearly was significantly better than this speech because of this reason, therefore it should be like a 2-point gap or something like that, and it's much easier to work from there because you already have like you have a direction to take from.
I also usually give points to the highest ranked team first, or either the lowest ranked team first, so that there's a benchmark, and it becomes easier to compare. Yeah.
I think this is the order of you, then.
There you go.
I guess that as a judge, you're oftentimes exposed to arguments to which you have like pre-knowledge, and you have already established some sort of already existing position. So my question to you would be how to avoid your own personal cognitive confirmation bias.
So part of it is really just mental training, right? You tell yourself that your biases don't matter. You force yourself to enter the debate with an open mind. The other ways to check yourself might be to repeatedly go back to your notes and just go, was this link actually made? Was evidence actually provided? Am I sure I am not filling in the gaps here? And when you are absolutely unsure, it does help in a panel. So there have been situations where I actually do ask my panel, I'm like, am I being too charitable to this team? Because this is how I think they proved that argument. And the panel will be like, no, they didn't see it that way. That link was missing. So really to just go back to your notes. Do you guys have thoughts on this? It's a good question.
Not particular, because if you are aware that you might be having biases, that's the most important step.
Yeah.
The next one is just, as Sharmila said, reminding yourself of these biases. I think probably the best way is, if you see emotion and you think you might be particularly opinionated about one side, probably spend more time gouging the teams you believe you might be biased against. Because if it once that you have an argument that you're more inclined to buy, spend more time analyzing the argument that is less intuitive, just to make sure that you're not cutting the team short simply because you don't believe the argument there.
Should we move on?
Yeah.
So, actually have 2 questions. First, what are some concrete characteristics you take in consideration when giving speaker points? And when you see the motion, do you have the tendency sometimes to expect from the speaker expect from their arguments to be similar to what you would have done if you were in their place?
So can I really quickly go for the latter one? I think that obviously when you get a motion, I don't know, it's very common, right? The first thing that you do is like, this is a fun motion. I would love to be up for this one. I really like this argument that is going to make from this motion. I do think that although you can expect teams to make certain arguments, If you get emotional about education, it's very normal to expect teams to talk about the effect on students. You should not punish teams for not running those arguments if they run different ones, but run them well. You can punish teams for literally not running anything that is relevant to the motion, but you shouldn't be punitive just because they didn't run the case that you like the best. And if they do run the case that you like the best, and you're like, oh man, what an incredible argument, and I've done the exact same thing, I think that you need to do what Tina and Sharmila was saying before, and be like, am I actually rewarding this speech because it was an 80? Or am I just giving it an 80 because that's the case that I would have run, and I think that my speech should get an 80. So just be very aware of that.
I'll just to follow up on that. I actively try to not think of the motion during the 15-minute prep time as a judge. I also really advise, I know that it's common for, if you're a wing in a tournament, to just go, well, I can spend this time prepping for the motion as if I was a team in it. I really strongly advise not doing that. Because it really predisposes you towards certain ideas that you came up with or things you would have done. Like I've had this situation where teams are literally running arguments that they know I have made in front of me as a judge, where you literally go, I cannot be creating these arguments just because I like them. Prepping also creates an attachment for you with emotions, so I really.
So that, and just accept and recognize that, so you're judging the debate in front of you, not the debate in your head, right? Like, debates are going to play out differently in different rooms. So in some rooms, the winning argument might be a heavily philosophical argument. In another room, it might be like, what saves us more money? It really depends on the debate. So usually when I'm judging, I have my feelings about what is important, but that's irrelevant usually. And I'm like, what do the teams insist in this debate is important to them? Do they agree on what's important? Who proves who gets their best? Or do they disagree on what's important? And who provides the best reasoning for why what they think is important is important? If no one is doing any of this, what would the average reasonable human find to be important, right? So that does help tether you, because you're like, what do the teams seem to find important in this round? What I feel is important is a bit irrelevant, right? So I agree with the whole emotional distance from the motion as well, although if you're a CA, what do you do?
Other questions about characteristics.
Yeah. So to go for your first question, again, I think that looking at the speaker scale is useful, because the speaker scale tend to have very similar sort of like, these are the things that you're looking for, and the difference in bands is like, this was proven well, this was proven like really, really well, this was like the best formulation of the argument you have had in your entire life, and no one could have run it better, it was like Jesus. So I think that, out of the top of my head, I think that the things that you take into account, that most speaker scales tell you, and that you should take into account is like, the relevance of the argument. Did you make relevant arguments? And then if they were irrelevant, then it's like lower. If they were very relevant, it's higher. The second is, I think, the strength of analysis of the argument. Do you say a relevant argument, but were you just like, this helps education because students will become smarter somehow, and it's like kind of relevant but very well analyzed? Or was it like a highly sophisticated, very strong argument, so the level of analysis also rises and speaks? And lastly, I think, is the complexity of the response that would be required to take down the argument. So if you make a really, really, and it's related to the other one, right, where this mentioned, the sort of, if it's like an incredibly difficult argument to take down, then it, again, deserves more speech, because it was a very, very well-made argument. And obviously this doesn't just apply to arguments, but to like the analysis that you give in a speech. So if you're like a second speaker or a with speaker, it's the same thing. Are your responses relevant? Are your responses well analyzed? Are your responses difficult to come back from? I think another thing that I think is important, and this is the last one, is this adding anything? Like, are you making a change for your team? So if you think that top half was really close, but that the winning speech, the speech that made you change for OG, was deputy, then that probably at least merits a question of, should then deputy get higher speech than PM? Or if you were like, I think that the reason why deputy was useful, like they gave this one response, but PM was the one that actually laid all the groundwork for that to happen. So I think that maybe PM should get higher speeds. So I also question inter-team dynamics.
One additional thing there is we do not take points down for arguments that were, like, if the argument didn't do active harm to the speech, you just had one really good argument and then one silly argument, or one that didn't do much, you don't go, okay, this was an argument, this argument was a 71, this argument was an 80, let's do it in the middle like a 76. It doesn't work that way. So, like, think, if only this one argument existed, how high would you give the speech? And go by that, with the one exception of speakers can occasionally do active harm to their case. If they make a harmful concession, if they respond very badly to a POI, things of that sort. So that should also factor in, but generally speaking, we don't deduce points just like we do, just like in rankings the same way.
So, sorry, it's like if you have new material in the opposition whip speech, or the whip speeches, what you do is you disregard the new material, so you're like, I cannot give credit to this because this shouldn't be here, but you don't double punish by saying, and I will take 3 points away from you. Because the fact that you are not giving credit to it already means there's less that you can give credit to, and that in itself already means they've been punished, right?
So this is not the debate that happened at I judged one term, and this will never happen again, but I want to know if we made the right call. What happened is that, we are sure about the rankings of the speaker. OG and CO got the motion wrong. OG and CO didn't do, even if we are wrong, let me rebut their case. But this was a middle. They had good style, they had the cases very well analyzed, rather well. This would be on a correct motion 75, 76. But it was not relevant to the motion at all. And what do you do with the speakers then? Because this is almost averaging 75, but missed it completely, had no evidence.
So OG got the motion wrong.
OG and CO.
Sure, OG got the motion wrong. Was this challenged by OO?
Yeah, O challenged, and OG was, no, you're wrong, this is the motion, and had some explanation.
So what was your adjudication of the definitional challenge? Did you think the challenge was valid?
Yes.
You thought the challenge was valid and successfully proven by OO?
Yeah.
But OO didn't do even if argument, so you basically...
O and CG did good. They were, even if we are wrong, they were really good in that one.
Sorry, so, because in the top half at that point, OO is beating OG, right? Yeah. Even if you have parallel debates. So, what did CG do?
CG took first rebutted OO.
Wait, sorry, so they played ball with OO's definition?
Yeah, they said
okay. So they abandoned their OG, which CG is allowed to do in a definitional challenge. The only time CG is allowed to knife their OG, technically. So CG took OO's definition. Yeah. Did OO and CG get first and second here?
Yes.
Cool, so your question is?
About speakers. Because what do you do with the speakers for OG and CO?
Speaker points if some of the things are completely irrelevant.
That's not some.
Yeah, everything is completely irrelevant.
But it's not levelized.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I'm not sure the speaker scale answers this question in itself. Trump's role is I guess.
I also wouldn't be too quick to say nothing is relevant there, right? The fact that OG tried to defend their definition is a relevant thing to do. You are, when your definition is challenged, you are answering a relevant question by attempting to defend it. You might not be persuaded of the defense, which means the content is weak, but it's not irrelevant. Did CO go with OG's definition?
Yes.
And did they try to defend why they did this?
Not really. They mostly...
Yeah.
Did they beat OG on that?
No.
Okay. I guess what I might disagree with you on here is, I don't know that this is a question of relevance. I suspect this is more a question of the material not being persuasive, or the responses being inadequate. So I don't think they would be like 50s here. If your concern is that, I imagine they would be, this would be below average, but there is a... So the other thing to remember about the scale is, it's obviously an approximation. So you try to identify where they best fit in the scale. Sometimes, if you give a speech of 75, that doesn't mean it ticks every single box in the 75 category and meets all the bands. It is the most appropriate description of the mathematical value, I guess, is one way to think about it. Yeah, but that is tricky. Yeah.
hopefully that never happens again, because
Yeah.
it's a really unique
It's more
situation.
common than you would think.
Yes, actually, yeah.
But I don't think that it means it's at 50, because
No.
Yeah.
it's a maybe relevant interpretation of emotion, it just wasn't in this debate. So it's not as high as if they have won the definitional challenge, but I don't think it's a 50.
It's the value engagement.
Yeah.
I mean, because they try to respond to OO, they do so, in a bad way, and you conclude that the initial challenge was not valid. But you can still try to value and appreciate the amount of effort that they put and amount of complexity they put into trying to defend that interpretation, and then give speaks according to how well you believe they defend the interpretation, even though you know it's objectively wrong.
Yeah.
We have a question here and a question there.
Before that, we are a little bit on time, so
Oh, we just have 3 minutes left, so we can't.
Okay, so
one question and
Yeah,
Okay,
one
I
question. You
Yeah, I
already
think
asked
that's
questions.
I don't know if this question relevant, but at the point in which you are judging, and in the room is, let's say, your best friend, which you clearly have bias against, how to fight off making links for stuff like
Okay, so in the first place, you are supposed to declare your clashes, right? So if you have had a romantic/sexual relationship with someone, if you professionally coached them, you come from the same debate institution, you technically shouldn't be judging them in the first place. So if you have any reason, if you have any reason to think you cannot be objectively judging a person, you should disclose this to the adjudication team. If it's just a practice debate or informal.
I happen to be in a debate in which people didn't do this.
Okay, in which case the same, I guess the same suggestions I would have for how do you distance yourself from specific arguments that you are more attached to, or specific side of the motion that you're more sympathetic to, would apply. Be conscious of it, and just be a bit more, and be critical of your own thought process and what credit you are attributing to them. But be fair also, don't overcompensate by punishing your friend for being your friend. I don't know.
I think also
And
you
let your wings be active.
You wanted to know about leaks?
What?
No, never mind, sorry.
Yeah, use your wings as a good test as well.
Yeah, I have a question connected to POIs. I mainly debate in word school, but I also heard these kind of things being said in BP debate when judges say, oh, you should take, the team should take more POI, otherwise if I'm going to judge you in another round, or if some other judge might came across, they're going to give you lower points. But are there actually people lower points for not taking POI?
So it is a rule-based issue that you should take one. So if you do not take any POIs that could hurt you, it's not a direct accounting mechanism where you're like, no POI minus 2. It doesn't work that way. But when you are being compared, especially to teams that you're close, in the close rankings in the round, it could work against you. Because you are like, this is seen as an inability to engage. But no, it's not. So taking one is a rules-based issue, taking two is great. You are under no obligation to take more than that, and definitely shouldn't be, what you do in one debate shouldn't count against you in another debate.
I think that for the sake of being safe, I would always attempt to take one. 2 reasons for that. The first one is there's some panels that will just go like, look, OO came before CG. CG did not respond very well to their arguments, and not only did they not respond, they also took no POIs. They were given an opportunity to engage, and therefore they shouldn't. And because we're currently not being able to decide between them, I think that OO, basically, CG had more time to respond. They didn't, and they were also not taking POIs. So we think that OO wins this one. They had an opportunity to respond and engage, and they didn't. So it can count against you. The other thing is that there's some CA teams that do this, that they do this weird rule where it's like, if you don't take a POI, then the panel must assume that a very damaging POI to your case was given. Some CA teams do this. I've seen it done before, and it's really obviously weird and impossible to decide. But I would say that just in case that you happen to be judged by some people who think that, you should try to take a POI.
But in general, when judging, you assess a lack of POIs being taken.
But don't judge like this.
You don't. you don't assess it mathematically, you assess it in the sense of how much it hurt the team.
Yeah.
So if it's a close comparison between OG and CO, CO doesn't take a POI from OG. Obviously, you can assume that OG would try to bring back the strongest material. This means that CO gave up the chance to respond to that strongest material, and you rank speaker points down depending on how much you think that hurts CO in the comparison to OG.
We should get.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you.